On today's Murder, She Wrote podcast, we find ourselves in New York, where Jessica is in the middle of a love triangle and must solve the murder of one of her students. Hello, and welcome to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, where I watch every single episode of the hit 80s show / 90s show, Murder, She Wrote, starring 3-time Academy Award nominee and 5-time Tony Award winner Miss Angela Lansbury. Today I'm going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 12, Murder by Appointment Only, air date January 5th, 1986. As always, if you're new to the Murder, She Wrote podcast, I spoil everything there is to spoil about the episode, the murder, the suspects, everything in between. This episode recently aired on Hallmark Channel Mysteries and Movies. They're up to Season 4 now. Believe me, I promise I will get there eventually. If you have not seen this episode recently, you can watch it for free on IMDb TV or NBC's Peacock app, or if you own the DVDs like I do, the complete series, get out Season 2, and this will be disc 3, and it's the last episode on that disc. Because, here we go. First off, I would like to wish everyone a very happy Memorial Day. I hope everyone had a good one. And if you are serving in the military in any way, shape, or form, thank you so much for your service. Thank you for defending our freedom. Because of you, I am proud to be an American. And there's something that I'd like to address before I start talking about this episode. I sometimes watch an episode 4 or 5 times before I actually get down and record the episode so that I can get everything that's in the episode down pat for you all. But sometimes I forget things. Like in the last episode, Murder Digs Deep, I forgot that Jessica and Seth referred to Steve and Karen as Clark Gable and Betty Garble. I don't see it. Not that I've ever seen any Clark Gable movies other than Gone with the Wind, and I believe I've seen any Betty Garble movies, but I just don't see it. And also, that episode was riddled with plot holes, and I still don't understand why they did it. Also, that episode's title made sense. The title of this one doesn't, but I might come up with a title towards the end. So let's get started with this episode. It was really good, a vast improvement over the last one, and I know that the next one that I get to experience is one of my favorites, Trial by Error. I love that one. I got 3 discs to go, and then I'm going to finish Season 2. And I'm going to try to get more episodes out. The summer is coming, and I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff with my friends. So I'm going to try to get some more episodes out and get Season 2 done. The big word there is try. I'm going to try. Because I'm in this to win. I'm going to do this all the way until the last season. I promise you. Because I'm enjoying it. Thank you for your continued support, your comments, the dialogue going about the episode, what we liked. One guy said that he loved when Jessica fake fell, to prove that it was a fake fall in Murder Digs Deep. And I love that part too, but I could not get a screenshot of it for the visual aid for what you're looking at when you're listening to the episode. Because it happened just too fast. I should have got Seth's reaction, because that was funny. But anyway, I apologize for forgetting things, and I will try to get more episodes out. Let's get started on this episode, though. We start off, this episode is set in New York, so we got stock footage of New York, and after watching the episode 5 times, I finally figured out the name of the hotel, and it's Hotel Hamilton. Not that it matters, because the hotel is not the plot of the thing, but if I didn't figure out the name of the hotel, I would have just said some random hotel in New York, so I'm glad that I know at least the name of it. So, we start off with a photo shoot. A woman is in a purple outfit. There's jungle surrounded by her. A woman also dressed all in purple, purple hat, purple blouse, purple scarf, purple print dress, purple pants, says, "This stinks. Get rid of the jungle. We're shooting a makeup commercial, not a Tarzan movie." Mrs. Fletcher comes into the hotel, bypasses the welcome desk, sees a sign for Lila Lee Cosmetics convention, and goes into the convention. The same woman who yelled at the photographer about the way that the ad looked, looks at Mrs. Fletcher and says, "You're out of uniform. It's Lila Lee time." This is Lila Lee herself, who's in charge of a big cosmetics company called Lila Lee Cosmetics, which is supposedly not a real company, but made up kind of like a representative of Avon or Mary Kay, because for a long time it was very popular for women to sell makeup door to door. That's how the nanny became the nanny. But anyway, Mrs. Fletcher sort of like says, "Huh?" and she sort of walks off. And this random woman walks by her and she says, "I'm looking for Grady Fletcher." And she says, "I've never heard that name before." And she says, "Well, you must have. He works with the Lila Lee company." And the woman says, "God help him." So just before Mrs. Fletcher decides to walk out, she notices that Lila Lee herself gets upset when a photographer puts some lipstick on the model. Apparently he's not supposed to use this. And she's like, "Go wipe her face." Norman says, "Lila, honey, maybe you need to go lie down." She says, "Whatever you think is best, Norman." And she turns to the photographer and she says, "My brother is going to be in charge, so if you step 1 foot out of line, you're going to be out on your..." And she's about to say ass when 2 other women come in and she goes, "Ladies, hello." The woman that went by Mrs. Fletcher earlier happens to be Norman's secretary. And he says she's in rare form today. She says, "I need your signature on some things." And he says a good secretary knows how to forge the boss's signature. And she says, "I'm saving that for something big." He laughs and signs the papers. Mrs. Fletcher goes out into the lobby and runs into Grady. And she says, "Grady, I don't understand. No one here seems to know who you are." He says, "Oh yeah, I don't got the job yet." There's a guy next to him, and this is Todd Anderson. He happens to be Norman's son, and he's going to put in a good word for Grady to get a job. Norman comes out as if on cue. Introductions are made. He says, "Okay, Grady, you just need to set up something with my secretary, and we'll get you that sales rep job." And Grady says, "I'm an accountant." He says, "Okay, yes, an accountant then." His secretary follows him and says, "I still have some things that need your signature." And he says, "Okay." She says, "There's this charge for vendors or something like that." And she said, "Elizabeth done it. 500. He said, "Oh, she must be buying me something for my birthday." And she goes, "Well, I thought your birthday was just pay for it, Linda." She says, "Okay," and she goes off. And then he says, "If you excuse me," to Mrs. Fletcher, he says, "Actually, as a matter of fact, speaking of Elizabeth, she's an inspiring writer. I think she would love to meet you. Maybe I can set it up for us to go to dinner." Before Mrs. Fletcher can respond, he says, "If you excuse me for a minute, my son and I obviously have to talk. We'll be right back." They go up to Norman's suite, and Norman goes to get himself a drink, and he asks Todd if he would like one, and Todd says no thanks, and he said, yes, I forgot you don't like when I drink. And Todd says, no, it's not that, Dad. It's that I don't really like your taste in women. He says, oh, this again. It's really none of your business. He goes, well, you are my father. I wish you would date someone your own age and not date someone like her. And he says, well, I'm not just going to date her. I'm planning on marrying her. And he says, well, if you want to be a fool, then just go ahead and be one. The door opens and we get introduced to Elizabeth Gordon. She is way younger than he is. And she says, I was brushing my hair when I heard the two of you come in, and I didn't want to make a fuss. He said, so you can eavesdrop on us? She said, I wanted to avoid a scene. But I couldn't help overhearing that the two of you were arguing over me, and I don't want that. He says, Todd says, Dad, if you marry her, you are making the biggest mistake of your life. He says, that's enough, and Todd leaves. After Todd leaves, Elizabeth says, Norman, it's not going to work between us. Everybody wants us not to be together, so obviously we shouldn't be. And he says, I love you. I don't care what people think. And she's like, okay. He says, I met the most fascinating woman downstairs. She's a huge best-selling author. Maybe you can get your juices flowing. Maybe I can set it up to meet us for dinner. She goes, oh, don't tease. I haven't written anything in years. Well, maybe she can inspire you to do so. Her name is Miss Jessica Fletcher. When Elizabeth hears the name, she seems almost not happy about it. She says, I don't understand. Or no, she's like, wait, no. She's like, wait, no, don't. I've had a pounding headache all day. I don't want to go. And he says, oh, well, should I call my doctor? I'm sorry, was this like a 1980s thing? People couldn't have a headache without someone saying, hey, should I call the doctor to make sure you're okay? But she tells him no. And he says, well, maybe some other time. Maybe she'll be back again. I don't know. And she looks at her watch and she goes, oh, I have a fitting. I have to go. And he's like, well, all right then. And she leaves. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, a cab driver arrives and just walks into the hotel. Apparently in this hotel, you can just walk in and do whatever it is that you're going to do. You don't have to check into the front desk. I don't know. Weird hotel. But he comes in. Elizabeth comes down. She's clearly about to meet this man. But just as he's about to call her name, Mrs. Fletcher says, Elizabeth? And Elizabeth is about to just go and ignore Mrs. Fletcher, but Mrs. Fletcher comes towards her and says, Elizabeth Gordon. And the weird man in the taxi walks away and leaves the hotel. And Elizabeth says, Mrs. Fletcher, is that you? And she says, yes, it's me. How have you been? What are you doing here? And Elizabeth says, I live here now. And she says, well, what are you doing here? And she says, well, let's sit down. She says, I've been here visiting publishers and doing a few interviews, this and that for my new book. And she was like, you were one of my best students. I thought one of these days you'd be a Pulitzer Prize winner. She said, I wish you'd told me that. I might have tried harder. I haven't had my luck. After college, I decided to move here because anyone who wants to write moves to New York, but I haven't really had much luck. She says, well, that's too bad. She said, I even remember who you used to sit behind. Cindy something, who couldn't remember how to spell. She said, wow, you have a great memory, Mrs. Fletcher. And we're really good friends. We write letters and she still can't spell. She's raising her kids in Augusta. Norman suddenly walks up and says, I can't believe it. How did the two of you ever meet? And he says to Elizabeth, this is the woman I was telling you about, to set up for us to, all three of us, to have dinner tonight. I can't believe how on earth the two of you met. And Elizabeth says, Norman, when you told me Mrs. Fletcher, or Miss Fletcher, I never dreamed that you were talking about my English teacher, Mrs. Jessica Fletcher. Yeah, I can see how you would confuse the two. Not. Um, and Mrs. Fletcher says, well, as flattering as the offer is, I've already finished up everything I had to do in New York, and I've already checked out of my hotel, so I was about ready to go home, so I'm not sure. And Norman's like, oh please, oh please, oh please. Come on, say you'll go with us, tonight. It'll be so great. She says, well, I guess I can stay with my nephew Grady. We seldom get to see each other, so, maybe. It'll be nice to see him. And that's that. So we got to later that night. They're at dinner at a restaurant that's down the street from where Elizabeth lives. I don't know the name of it. Doesn't matter. They're sitting there. Elizabeth has not shown up. And I thought at this point in the episode, even though I watched it 4 times, that Lila Lee might be dead. But no. Elizabeth has not shown up. So Mrs. Fletcher and Norman decide to go to her apartment. When they walk in the door, Norman has a key. They walk in, and Elizabeth has a portrait on the wall of her that Norman had done. And the place looks ransacked. The camera zooms in on a playbill, the dinner guest. And then the doors are open in the second room, and Elizabeth is found murdered. So Elizabeth has been murdered, and we get introduced to Lieutenant Verrick, played by the same man that played the role of Stanley Subornak on The Golden Girls, via Arthur's on-screen ex-husband, whom Angela Lansbury was best friends with Bea Arthur. I'm still holding out hope that maybe Bea Arthur made a Murder, She Wrote guest appearance, but I'm not sure if she did. She probably didn't. But wouldn't have that been so cool if she did? Unlike most of the detectives on the show, where they're all like, Mrs. Fletcher, stay out of my investigation, I will figure it out on my own. She basically just, he just wants to talk about how it's hard to find an apartment in New York and what's wrong with New Yorkers. He doesn't seem to be very concerned with solving the crime. He proposes that there was a robbery gone wrong, but Mrs. Fletcher points out that the killer did not take anything, including a jeweled lipstick case. Poor Norman is sitting there completely traumatized, in shock, and does not know what to do or say. He loves Elizabeth. He says that he got her the jeweled lipstick case and that there are real rubies on it. So they're stumped about the crime. Who could have done it? The next scene, we're at Grady's apartment. He is on the phone with Todd, telling Todd, well, with everything that's happened, I don't think that you guys have to worry about getting me the job right now. Yeah, normally Grady is directly involved with the plot, but in this episode, he seems to just serve whenever the plot is convenient for him. And he doesn't have a love interest in this episode. Normally, in most episodes, he has a love interest that ends up only lasting 1 episode. But I guess they decided to try something different in this episode. So he tells Todd that he doesn't need to worry about the job right now with everything that's happening. And he basically then proceeds to pretend that he has a maid that's vacuuming and then sends the maid home. It's really weird. It makes absolutely no sense, I can honestly say. It makes absolutely no sense at all. Mrs. Fletcher comes in and she says, Grady, are you sure I'm not inconveniencing you by staying with you? I have to stay until I solve Elizabeth's murder. He says, yeah, you're not conveniencing me. I love when you stay with me. And he says, I'm so sorry about what happened. And she says, I wish you would have known her. She was such a smart student. And he says, well, the bed is lumpy, but the couch is very comfortable. And she says, well, I'll take the couch, you take the lumpy bed. And then he says, oh, and one more thing. The hot plate doesn't boil water anymore, so your tea is kind of lukewarm. She says, that's the way I like it. And she says, but one thing with Elizabeth troubles me. And he says, well, what's that? She says, well, she didn't seem to be very happy to see me. It was as if she was hiding something. The next day, or that same day, I'm not sure, Mrs. Fletcher goes back to the hotel and runs into Lila Lee herself, who says, Mrs. Fletcher, you should have told me you weren't one of us. To apologize, here is the whole Lila Lee franchise for all of Cabbage Cove. That's the famous line. The famous line. That they have. So, that's your visual aid, them fighting over the purple case. Mrs. Fletcher says, no thank you, and Lila Lee says, well, you could be a perfect Lila Lee girl. She said, you probably have lots of things you can't pay for. Being a writer doesn't pay for everything. And, Mrs. Fletcher again says no, and she says the sale starts when the customer says no. And then Mrs. Fletcher decides to change the subject and says, I must extend my sympathies to you. And she says, why? We made a lot of money last year. And she says, no, not that. To your brother Norman. He was going to marry Elizabeth. Wherever you heard that, you're wrong. Norman wasn't going to marry that gold digger, that gold digging hussy. And Mrs. Fletcher says, why would you call her that? She says, I offered her $50,000 to not marry Norman, and she wouldn't take it. And Mrs. Fletcher said, well, doesn't that mean that she's not a gold digger? And she says, well, why take the $50,000 when she could get more once she married Norman? Mrs. Fletcher then calls Grady on the phone, and she tells him to look up the friend Cynthia, that she might be married in an Augustus with children. Grady somehow manages to track this woman down, and this leads to Mrs. Fletcher going to see Fiona Kiefer. When Mrs. Fletcher arrives, and Fiona Kiefer is played by Christina Bradford, who was in season 1 as the murder victim's husband and We're Off to Kill the Wizard. She gets a little bit more to do in this episode, but not much. She is, of course, famous for being Steve's mother on Beverly Hills 90210 and guest starring as Rose's daughter, Kirsten, in season 1 of The Golden Girls. More on her a little bit later, though. Anyway, she tries to pretend that she's an employment agency that gives the girl jobs, typing jobs and different things like that. Mrs. Fletcher says, that's interesting considering the fact that Elizabeth failed typing and failed shorthand. And she says, was Elizabeth a prostitute? And she says, the best in the business. So Elizabeth was a prostitute. Mrs. Fletcher says, I don't understand. She was so smart. She had such a great background. How did this come to be? And she was like, well, none of my girls are from the street, Mrs. Fletcher. And she said, of course she had to pay bills and she didn't have a lot of money. Sometimes people are successful in New York, but the majority of them are not. She said, but she told me to take her off the list when she met Norman. She met him at a charity function. She always liked to volunteer for charity events. And she met him there and they had a lot in common, and now she was marrying him. I told her it was a bad idea because he was way too old for her. And she said, well, does Norman know that she's a prostitute or was a prostitute? And she says, no, I told her not to tell him and I'm not sure if she did or not. A man like him wouldn't be so happy about that sort of thing. So Grady goes to the hotel and sees Todd and Norman talking. Todd apologizes to Norman about what he said a couple days before about Elizabeth, and Mrs. Fletcher shows up. Grady just sort of leaves. I don't know why he's there. There's no explanation given. And Mrs. Fletcher goes up to Todd and she says, I understand you didn't want your father to marry Elizabeth. He said, yeah, it's true, I didn't. And I wished her dead because I didn't think he should be with a woman like that. And then he said, but I didn't kill her. And for your information, I was in my room reading all night. That's my alibi. She said, well, that's great, Todd, but I didn't ask for it. And then he says, Grady warned me you were smart. And he walks away. The lieutenant comes up, Lieutenant Verwick, and he says, well, we have tested all the lipsticks in Elizabeth's apartment, and none of it matches the lipstick on the painting. So, don't know what to do with that. And we don't have any suspects so far. Except if something happened with him, and she says, no, he didn't kill Elizabeth, just overshare her or something to that effect. So then Lila Lee notices that Linda, Norman's secretary, is suddenly now wearing more flattering outfits because she has a crush on Norman. And Lila Lee informs her that she can dress in any outfit she wants. Norman will never go with her because she is an employee. Mrs. Fletcher goes up to Norman's suite, and she says, I went to go see a woman today named Mrs. Kiefer. He said, yep, back in the day we would have called her a madam. And she goes, you knew about Elizabeth being a prostitute? He said, yes, but she was not in that business anymore. She fell on hard times, and she needed a job, and she couldn't find anything, so she turned to that. But I assure you, she had quit. She said, I'm sorry, Norman. I had to ask you if you knew what you knew. His secretary comes in and says, you have an appointment with the hotel spa. You need to relax. And he says, cancel it. And his secretary says, I will not. And he says, see how she cares about me? And he says, fine, I'll go. So he exits, and Mrs. Fletcher is alone with the secretary, and she says, I couldn't help but notice the other day when you brought up the sales slip from Vanville's that Norman seemed surprised. And you mentioned that his birthday was 2 months away. She said, yes, I have his birthday marked on my calendar. She said, well, why was he so upset? I mean, maybe she did buy it for his birthday. She said, well, she definitely didn't buy anything for herself. That's specifically a men's store. And it was for $500. She says, well, do you still have the sales slip? And she says, yes, I do. She says, well, can I borrow it? And she goes, why? She goes, I'm sure that Norman will appreciate any help you can give to find Elizabeth's killer. And the secretary reluctantly gives her the sheet, which made me think that she was the killer. When Lila Lee threatened the secretary with saying that Norman will never be with her, I assumed that meant Lila Lee killed her. But no. So Grady then goes to the store, poses as the man, saying he did not get his whatever the item was in question. The salesperson insists that it was delivered and that he signed for it. Grady says, well, that is not my signature. That's a forgery. And I need it for a very important business meeting. And he says, a tuxedo? He says, yes, it's for the Association of Waiters. They find out that the man's name is Roger, and he was the man that mysteriously got out of the cab and was waiting for Elizabeth in the lobby. Mrs. Fletcher recognizes him right away when she goes to see him. Yeah, somehow they even manage to track him down at the theater, and she goes. He basically tells her that him and Elizabeth were lovers, and then when she got with Norman, he begged her to go, even going as far as trashing her place one time. And Mrs. Fletcher gives him like a look, and he says, a different time. I didn't kill her, Mrs. Fletcher. We made love, and then I never saw her again. I miss her like crazy. I didn't want her to be with Norman. But she insisted that if she married him, that her being a prostitute wouldn't be a thing anymore. She would be accepted into society. She loved him, but he couldn't fulfill her needs like I could. Wow. So, he goes off to get on stage to do whatever play he's doing, and Mrs. Fletcher sees some lipstick on the dressing table and she takes it. The lieutenant, Verwick, comes over and says, good job there taking the lipstick, Miss Fletcher. Unfortunately, it doesn't match the lipstick on the painting. And he says, I don't know about this one, I'm stumped. And then he's looking at Grady's apartment and he goes, you know, this is nice. This is real nice. Really rare to find. And Grady comes in and he's holding a purple makeup case and a Lila Lee uniform. And the lieutenant stops and he says, if you ever decide to give this place up, will you let me know? And he goes, yep, I'll keep you in mind. And Miss Fletcher sees what's in Grady's hand and she's like, that woman is relentless. She never gives up. They open the case and Grady opens a tube of lipstick and says, hey, could this be the one we're looking for? She says, no, that's too dark. But she looks at the list and realizes that there's a tube of lipstick missing. She puts on the Lila Lee uniform and somehow manages to find where they make the lipstick and where they make the makeup. This isn't in the hotel. I have no idea where this is. I watched the episode 5 times and I still have no freaking clue where she is or how she found out where this place is, unless it was on the paper. I don't know. But as soon as she comes in the door, the main scientist guy goes, oh my god, it's a Lila Lee lady. And she says, there is a tube of lipstick that my customers went over wild. They ordered 20 cases, but they informed me that they can't fulfill the order because it doesn't exist anymore. He says, what's the number? He looks it up and he says, well, how'd you get a tube of that? Miss Lila Lee herself didn't like it and I destroyed all the tubes. The only tube I know that got out was a photographer used it. And the pieces all come together. Later that night, Lila Lee is having a big, huge convention where they're awarding people for the most sales and giving away cars to everyone. They brought a car somehow into the hotel auditorium, and it's a purple car. Yeah, there's lots of purple. That's the big theme, and the prop department did a very good job of making this look like a real company. Mrs. Fletcher bypasses everyone and makes a beeline for Norman, who's standing on the sidelines. She takes him backstage and says that she knows who killed Elizabeth. And here it is in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen. Norman is our killer. And here's the how and why. And how Mrs. Fletcher put it together. Mrs. Fletcher says that they were able to match any of the lipsticks in Elizabeth's apartment to the lipstick that was on the painting because the tube of lipstick that was used did not exist because all the tubes had been destroyed except for the one that the photographer had used, and Norman put it in his pocket. So the only one that could have defiled Elizabeth's portrait was Norman himself. Mrs. Fletcher puts two and two together. When Norman's secretary told him about the bill from the men's store, he assumed that Elizabeth was back with Roger, which he was right. He went to her apartment angry that she had been with Roger, that he wanted to ruin her portrait, but he couldn't find anything to ruin it, so he used the lipstick. When he was looking for something, he found the playbill, the dinner guest, which confirmed that she had been to see him. She thought that that was all over, or he thought that was all over with, and he wasn't going to be with her anymore. But he was wrong. Well, he was actually right, that she was still with him. She came home, and she saw that he was angry, and she tried to run, and he strangled her with her scarf and killed her. My question is, okay, why have Mrs. Fletcher go back with him to discover the body? He knows she's a famous mystery writer. Her reputation is well known. She was going to solve the crime because she cared about Elizabeth. But he says he couldn't stop picturing them together, and he couldn't believe he actually killed her. And the lieutenant comes, arrests him. Lila Lee is on stage, calling for Norman to get on stage, but he's getting led away in handcuffs, and Mrs. Fletcher looks on sadly, and that's the way the episode ends. We don't know if Grady ever got the job at the company. I'm assuming not, since the CEO got arrested for murder. The company probably will go bankrupt after that. But this was a really well-rounded episode. There's a lot of people you suspect, lots of red herrings. You suspect Lila Lee, the secretary. And unfortunately, they're not the ones. So let's go over the guest stars. There were a lot of recognizable ones in this one. We have Jane Meadows, who played Lila Lee herself. Let's find out what she was known for. She was really good in this role, I have to say, and give credit where credit is due. She unfortunately passed away in 2015 at the age of 95. She's known for City Slickers, David and the Browshina, Alice in Wonderland, and College Confidential. Her last known credit is 1999's The Story of Us. She guest starred on Diagnosis Murder, Homicide: Life on the Street, The Nanny as herself, High Society, City Slickers 2, 1 and 2, Manhunt, Saint Elsewhere, Love Boat, Alice in Wonderland in 1985, Hotel, Fantasy Island, Trapper John MD, the original Hawaii Five-0, this is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. She also was in the film Casino, which was a really big hit movie. Oh yeah, by the way, the biggest hit movie of 1986 was Top Gun with Tom Cruise. Christine Bradford, let's see if this is her last episode of Murder, She Wrote. I think it could be. Again, she's known for Christine, Outlaws, the TV series, Battlestar Galactica, the original, and The Greatest American Hero. Her last known credit is from 2007, a TV movie whose name I can't pronounce. She did some voiceover for the Wild Thornberrys. Oh, she'll appear in 2 other episodes of Murder, She Wrote, so we'll go over more of her credentials then. Robert Gipp played our murderer. He died in 2010 at the age of 79. He is known for the original I Spy with Bill Cosby, The Greatest American Hero, Hickey and Bongs and Half-Life 2. It's a video game. His last known credit is The Assignment from 2010. He did some voice work on Robot Chicken. He was on Everybody Loves Raymond, The Dead Zone, Chicago Hope, The Secret Files of the Spy Dogs, Diagnosis Murder, the original Law and Order, did some voiceover work for Gargoyles, loved that show growing up, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, Wings, Lonesome Dove the series, The Nanny, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. He was in the movie The Pelican Belief. Columbo, Perry Mason, The Case of the Defiant Daughter. The Golden Girls is Simon. Oh yeah! When the episode where Blanche gets a peacemaker, I knew he looked familiar. Who's the Boss? Silent Night, Deadly Night 3. Madlock, The Cosby Show. Hotel, Highway to Heaven, and this is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. Hill Castle and McCormick, Calendar Girl Murders, I think I saw that movie. The Love Boat, Police Story, Mrs. Columbo, Roots, The Next Generation, Flood, that was a good one. Shaft. So he had a long career. He was in 174 different projects over his career, so he did good. Roger was played by Robert Darcio. Probably not saying that right. He is still alive. He is known for the original Knots Landing, Liberal Arts, MacGyver and Loud, and The Sopranos. His last known credit is in 2014 on Modern Family. He guest starred on Ugly Betty. He was in an after-school special, The Jeff Foxworthy Show, The Rockford Files. Oh, he'll appear in several other episodes of Murder, She Wrote, so we'll go over more of his credits then. Maybe he'll play a different character. He didn't really get much to do. Anne Dusenberry played the role of our murder victim, Elizabeth. She is still alive. She is known for Life with Lucy, Cutter's Way, Heartbeat, and Jaws 2 as Tina. Yes, I thought she looked familiar. Her last known credit is a short called Roaring Camp. I don't know. She guest starred on Madlock, Designing Women, Jake and the Fat Man, and she'll appear in another episode of Murder, She Wrote in 1987. So we'll go over more of her credits then. That'll be interesting to see. And like I said, the lieutenant was played by Herb Edelman, who played Stanley. Let's see if this is his last episode of Murder, She Wrote. He died in 1996 at the age of 62. He's known for The Odd Couple, The Golden Girls, Barefoot in the Park, and California Suite. His last known credit is Cops and Roberts. I don't know what he played. And he'll appear in several more episodes of Murder, She Wrote, so we'll go over more of his credentials then. Todd was played by Lee McCrossley. I probably said that wrong. He is still alive. He is known for Inferno, 1980, Just One of the Guys, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and Babylon 5. His last known credit is A Young and the Restless as Dr. Kirk Costner. He guest starred on Bones. He was also on One Life to Live in 2000, Beverly Hills 90210, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, JAG, Babylon 5, General Hospital, Damian Smith, Dr. Damian Smith, Third Rock from the Sun, Chicago Hope, Life Goes On, Jake and the Fat Man, Santa Barbara. He was in a lot of soap operas, Dallas, Hotel, Love Boat, Fantasy Island, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, Hawaii Five-0. This is his only episode of Murder, She Wrote. But he was on a lot of different things. Isn't that amazing? He was good with what little they gave him. Millie Perkins played the secretary. And I recognized her right away, even though she's a little bit grown up. She was known for Wall Street, the first movie adaptation of the Diary of Anne Frank as Anne Frank, the movie where Shelley Winters won the Oscar, The Witch Who Came from the Sea, and The Shooting. Her last known credit is being on The Young and the Restless in 2006 as Rebecca Kipling. She was on Any Day Now, awesome show, Touched by an Angel. She did some after-school specials, TV movies. She was in a series called Elvis, Knots Landing, 30-something, The Magical World of Disney. This is her only episode of Murder, She Wrote. Oh, that's sad, because she would have been great. She got started in Heart to Heart. Yeah, she had a good career. Awesome. Well, that's all of our guest stars, everyone. This was a great episode. I enjoyed covering it. I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about it. It was very great, a vast improvement from Murder Digs Deep. And like I said, the title of this episode makes no sense. Murder by Appointment Only. I'm guessing this refers to the fact that Elizabeth is a prostitute, but she's not a prostitute anymore, so I would call this Lipstick of Death. That's all. That's what I would call it, because it involves lipstick more than anything else. Well, guys, like I said, I'm going to try to get more episodes out. I hope you enjoyed this one. Have a good night, day, whenever you listen to this. Happy crime solving, and I'll see you in the next one.